The following talk is sponsored by the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. If you're watching the video on YouTube, please take a moment and subscribe to the Academy YouTube channel. You can always access the channel by going to classicalliberarts.com/YouTube. We hope that you enjoy the lesson. God bless. Today is July 31st, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. I'd like to talk to homeschooling parents about a problem that I've noticed as I've worked with homeschooling families and as I watch the homeschooling industry and what it does. I'd like to talk about wasting time and money in homeschooling, because this is a real problem that I see, and I don't think that most homeschooling parents are conscious of the problem. In modern schools, since the 1850s, minimum standards have become the norm for education. And these minimum standards in modern schools really concern just a few subjects: English language arts, mathematics, modern natural sciences, a foreign language, and what's called social studies. When we really look at what this modern curriculum requires, it's very, very little. It's really not a lot of study. It's not difficult work that needs to get done. It's actually very basic. It's literally the minimum legal requirements for compulsory education, and yet this minimum requirement education has become the norm and is treated almost like it's the rule for education. And so what happens is this basic education, this minimal education, is pursued over 12 years of schooling, and there's really not much to be done. So this minimum standards education is divided by 12 years, and what happens is, rather than getting this work done and pursuing higher things in education, schools simply spend all of their time on this minimum standards education. And the educational industry, all of the publishing of the books and the constant production of study materials and resources and accessories, just makes a living creating more and more products and services that relate to this modern curriculum. They continue to break down these simple studies into more and more detail and make it more and more complicated with more and more resources required. They make a science out of something that's really very simple. And homeschooling parents, when they choose to homeschool, they often are familiar with nothing but this modern approach to education, and they act as if this is real and this is how education should actually be done. So, for example, we'll have homeschooling families talking about Montessori education, which makes no sense. Montessori education was developed to imitate normal household living away from home. So the idea was that we can take activities that a child would do who's being raised at home, and we can imitate those activities in an artificial modern school. And yet we have homeschool families where the children are living at home, buying Montessori supplies to participate in this philosophy of education where one imitates household activities with all kinds of artificial school supplies. And doing that at home makes no sense. And this is what many homeschool families do. The Montessori error is just one example of this irrational approach to education at home. The same thing happens with the K-12 curriculum. Parents who are homeschooling can't explain why they're allowing minimum modern standards to define what they do at home. And they end up doing the same thing that modern schools do. They take this basic, bare bones minimum education, they divide it by 12 years of schooling, and they pretend that that's what education is supposed to be. It's supposed to be this 12-year pursuit of the legal minimum requirement for education. And so what happens is they try to make a science out of basic skills and basic studies. And so we see parents endlessly barraged with catalogs and books and products and study materials and teaching resources, school supplies, on and on, that are all designed to make some great adventure out of what is a minimum standards education. And homeschooling parents end up talking about all the different creative ways that they're helping their children to study things that really are so simple that if they're studied at the appropriate time in the appropriate way, they need hardly any assistance from adults or teachers at all. And yet it's turned into some great science, usually by focusing on the wrong things at the wrong times and making very difficult something that would be very simple if the parents just waited until the appropriate time. For example, you'll see homeschool programs that are supposedly teaching science to elementary school students. And so homeschool parents will be buying science supplies for 8 and 9-year-old children and talking about science studies. And so they've made this very simple study that's appropriate for students who are in high school who've already studied algebra, for example. And by trying to introduce these studies to children who are in elementary school, children who are not ready to simply study these subjects, they've got to invent this circus of activities and resources to try to have some kind of science activities at the elementary level. And it's unnecessary. It's not appropriate. It shouldn't be part of an elementary education, and it's not required by anyone at that level. It's simply being promoted by the companies producing all of these resources for sales. And the homeschooling parents seem to not understand that that's what's going on. What elementary students should be learning is how to study independently. That's really what they need to learn. They need to learn how to follow a schedule. They need to learn the basic skills that are required for study, basic reading and writing. And by reading, I don't mean literacy or cultural literacy. I don't mean learning literature. I mean learning the actual skill of how to read at a level that will allow them to study independently by the time they're 12 or 13 years old. They need to learn to write and to type and to follow instructions and to use educational tools like an LMS, which they'll be using all the way through their college studies. Young children need to learn to become independent students. They should not be attempting to get into academic information because the time for that is later. It's not appropriate to have students who are not growing in independent learning skills pretending that they're going to gain some great academic content knowledge. And parents get this backwards, especially in homeschooling. So if you're spending lots of time and money on basic K-12 studies, you're making a great mistake in homeschooling. You're probably spending way too much time on things that you should not be spending time on. You're probably spending way too much money on education when very little is actually needed for your children to receive the best education possible. And you've got to be very careful that you don't bring a modern consumer mindset into education, because it's simply not appropriate. Education takes place in the mind, and there's nothing that you can buy and install in the mind of your child. True education develops in a natural way through necessary subjects that are arranged in a certain order. That's what a curriculum is. And modern education does not have a real human curriculum. That's why the classical Catholic curriculum that we teach in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy is so important. It's a real human curriculum developed by history's wisest and best men. So beware of spending lots of money and time doing things in the wrong way at the wrong time simply because that's what people are selling. In the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, we lay things out so simply for parents that they almost don't know what to do with it. And here's the simple rule for how to handle your children's education. Just get the tasks done. Just get tasks done. If a child can complete a task, often parents will think that something's wrong, like there must be some more complicated thing we're missing. There must be some other way that we should do this. There must be some other activity that we should make use of because it just seems too simple to go through the topic and mark it complete. But that's the reality of modern education. It's very simple. Parents need to put their children in courses that are appropriate for their age and ability level and just get tasks done. What happens in many homeschools is the parents spend so much time doing all kinds of activities on topics and skills that are very basic, and none of that activity benefits the student in any way. It doesn't get recorded on a transcript. It's not graded. There's no record of those activities. And hours and hours, even years of time are wasted that the children receive no benefit for. Whereas if children would simply complete tasks, mark them complete, and move on to the next task, and get beyond the minimum requirement education into more advanced studies, the students would actually accomplish things that will benefit them in the long run. Because when we get to college admission, for example, very few parents understand how college admission works. The college admission representatives, when they review applications, they look for a diploma and a transcript. And when they look at a transcript, they look for very basic information. They look for which courses have been completed. They make sure that modern high school requirements are satisfied. And they look at grades for their own statistics. And that's it. They don't care about methods. They don't care whether a student has actually mastered a certain concept. They don't care whether you've used a certain product or resource or approach to learning. They simply look at the transcript, make sure the required stuff is on the transcript, and that's it. When we talk about admission to selective schools, they look for other things. They're not looking at basic high school requirements. They look to see whether the students have sought out the most challenging courses available to them. That is, that they've gone above and beyond the legal requirements. And most homeschool students don't go above and beyond because they waste so much time, so much energy, so much money on the basic skill stuff that they don't make any progress other than what all of the normal public school students are making. And ultimately, this isn't some kind of wisdom that benefits the children. This actually penalizes homeschool students. Many parents think that they're creative and clever because they come up with all kinds of wacky ways to teach basic skills. But what those things are actually doing is wasting the children's time and penalizing them as homeschool students, when the students who are being homeschooled should be helped to move as efficiently as possible through modern studies so that they can get into advanced classical Catholic studies, which will actually separate them from the normal, ordinary high school student and reward them for homeschooling. Most homeschool students do not get this reward because their parents play around with all kinds of wacky things for modern school studies, which doesn't make any sense and defeats the whole point of homeschooling. So the key, which the Classical Liberal Arts Academy allows, is for students to just complete tasks and move forward. In sports, we have a saying that's just win and advance, win and advance. And sometimes a team wins a game or a player wins a contest and he doesn't win as well as he would have liked to, or the team doesn't win by as large a margin as they would have liked to. They barely win. When that happens, we tell teams, we tell players, just win and advance. Don't worry about the details of how you won. The goal is just to win and advance. And the same is true in modern studies. The goal is just to get the tasks completed and move on, not to waste time on these basic skills, because you can spend your entire life on any part of a modern education by just making it more complicated than it actually is, by pursuing mastery of something that really doesn't deserve mastery, when what you should do is simply complete it and advance to the next task so that you can get into real advanced studies. If the curriculum is basic, there's no reward for becoming the super master of the basic curriculum. It really doesn't make any sense. The goal is to get tasks finished and move on, and this is what homeschooling parents get wrong. Again, in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, our program can look pretty boring because that's all we focus on. We focus on giving the children what they need to complete the required task, allowing them to mark it complete or demonstrate completion through an assessment, and then move on. We're not playing around. We're not trying to make some great adventure out of basic education. We're trying to get the kids through these things as efficiently as possible so they can devote themselves to real classical Catholic studies that separate them from the crowd, which should be the goal of homeschooling. So don't allow yourself to fall into this consumer trap of making more of basic modern education than you should. It doesn't matter that companies are manufacturing all kinds of school products and activities and manipulatives and all this stuff. Of course they're doing that. They're trying to make money. But none of that stuff is necessary. Just get the tasks done, check the boxes, and finish the modern education requirements, because your children need time and resources from you to get into advanced classical Catholic studies so they can actually have a great education. Get the tasks done and move on. Stop wasting time and money on basic education skills that no one cares about and your children are not going to be rewarded for. I hope that's helpful. God bless your studies. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy works to research, restore, publish, and teach the classical Catholic curriculum enjoyed by wise men and saints throughout history. To join us for classical Catholic studies or to learn more about the programs available, visit classicalliberalarts.com.